The evening shimmered with gold. Inside the grand rotunda of Chicago's Field Museum, chandeliers swayed with the promise of legacy and power. Beneath them, the city's elite moved like polished shadows, governors, CEOs, artists with last names that opened doors and guests whose shoes never knew the feel of public pavement. The event was meant to be a coronation. Billionaire Richard Sterling stood at the edge of the marble stage, the soft roar of polite conversation swelling behind him. He looked the part. Silver streaks at his temples, a jaw chiseled by both genetics and public scrutiny, and that quiet kind of arrogance worn only by men who'd won too many battles unchallenged. The spotlight followed him like a loyal dog as he raised a crystal flute and cleared his throat. "Good evening," he began, his voice velvet over steel. "Tonight I am not here merely to celebrate the merger of art and innovation, though that alone is reason to raise our glasses. No, I'm here to share something personal, something that reminds us all that even the most calculated lives can still be moved by the heart." The crowd leaned forward, eager. Richard's smile was a polished thing, practiced inoffensive. "It is my greatest honor to introduce you to the woman who has restored color to my world, my partner, my future." He gestured toward the wings of the stage. "Please welcome." But he never finished the sentence. A figure stepped into the light, and the room gasped as one. She didn't shimmer. She didn't need to. Her presence struck like thunder on a clear day. A woman with deep umber skin and a gaze that didn't falter under the weight of hundreds of stares. Her curls framed her face like a crown, and her simple black gown was elegance, redefined clean lines, no labels but worn like armor. And in each hand she held a child. Twins, a boy and a girl no older than 10. Their eyes scanned the room, bewildered but brave. Their skin held the same warm tone as hers, but their bone structure, their strong jaw lines, the tilt of their heads, the piercing ice blue eyes were unmistakable. They were Richard Sterling's children. The billionaire's champagne flute shattered on marble glass, shards exploding like an exclamation. He staggered back as though struck. "No, no, it can't be." His knees buckled before the cameras could flash, before the society wives could whisper, before the photographers could lower their lenses. The great Richard Sterling collapsed at the feet of the woman he thought he had erased from memory. And she did not blink. 12 years earlier, Amara Bennett had stood by this man's side in a wedding gown stitched with promises. Back then, she was a rising star in the art world, a ceramicist with hands that birthed beauty from clay, with eyes that saw stories in every crack. She had believed in him, in love, in forever. But forever had tried to kill her. And now here she stood, uninvited, unbroken, and undeniable, with living proof that Richard's past was still very much alive. The room was silent. Some guests glanced at one another, unsure whether to clap or scream. Others checked their phones, wondering if this was some grand act of performance art. But a few those who'd lived long enough to recognize the look in a woman's eyes when she had nothing left to lose stared with awe. The twins stood close to their mother, their small fingers threading through hers. The boy looked up at Richard's crumpled form with something like confusion. The girl simply watched, wide-eyed lips parted slightly, as if tasting a moment too large for words. Security rushed the stage. Murmurs surged like wildfire. Somewhere in the back, a man whispered, "Is that Amara Bennett?" The name echoed across the marble dome like a secret finally released. Amara said nothing. She didn't need to. Her presence alone answered the unspoken question. Richard Sterling's past had returned not as scandal, not as rumor, but in flesh and bone and breath. And the reckoning had begun. Later, the tabloids would erupt. Ghostwife returns with Sterling twins, tycoon's collapse caught on camera. Who is Amara Bennett and where has she been? But those headlines would only scratch the surface. They wouldn't tell you what it felt like to step back into the world that once cheered your disappearance. They wouldn't describe the weight of walking into a room where your name had been scrubbed clean only to lay it down like a sword. And they would never capture the tremble in Amara's hand as she held her daughter's fingers tighter that night, not from fear, but from knowing that every step forward from here would be war. Not the kind with bullets or ballots, but the kind only a mother wages when her children are at stake. Stories like this don't unfold in silence. They demand to be heard. If your heart paused in your chest just now, if you felt the hush that settled over that room when truth walked in dressed in black, don't scroll away just yet. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you would have done. Tap that like button if Amara's strength moved you. And if you want to know what secret she carries and just how deep Richard Sterling's darkness runs, follow this channel. The next chapter will take you where even the headlines dare not go, because this is just the beginning. The tea was always sweet. Orange blossom with a hint of vanilla, sometimes a curl of lemon rind, floating like a secret on the surface. It arrived each evening at precisely 7, served in the porcelain cup Richard had bought her from a Paris flea market on their honeymoon. A gesture of affection, he said. A ritual. A husband's care distilled into warmth and fragrance. At first, Amara believed him. She believed in many things then. That love once declared before friends and God would protect. That a man like Richard Sterling, visionary, powerful, polished, could be tamed by devotion. That kindness given consistently would one day soften the edges of his ambition. She believed even when doubt knocked quietly. And when the tea began to taste like old coins, like something metallic pressed between her teeth, she told herself it was her own anxiety. She was working too hard, not sleeping enough. Maybe the clay dust in her studio was clinging to her senses, but the taste returned stronger. One evening, she sat at the breakfast bar of their high-rise apartment as golden twilight poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows. Lake Michigan glimmered below. The skyline beyond looked like something she might have sculpted, tall, bold, fragile. "Why does the tea taste like pennies, Richard?" she asked softly. He paused mid-sip, the cup still hovering at his mouth. Then slowly, smoothly, he smiled. "Pennies, darling," he said with a chuckle. "Perhaps you're coming down with something." Something in her chest cracked. That crack would become a fracture, then a chasm. Amara had been feeling strange for months. The tremors in her hands, the inexplicable weight loss, headaches that pulsed like drums behind her eyes. She'd stopped painting. Her thoughts were no longer smooth brushstrokes. They scattered like broken pigment, unreliable and clouded. Friends noticed. They said she looked tired, pale, worn. Only once did her best friend Jasmine press harder. "Girl, I love you," she'd said, cupping Amara's cheek at a cafe in Lincoln Park. "But you don't look well. Is everything okay with him?" Amara had offered the standard reply. "He's under pressure, that's all. The firm, the investors. He's just distant lately." But it wasn't distance she feared. It was proximity. It was how he watched her like a man waiting for something to give. How his fingers lingered too long on her teacup, the way he always poured it himself. How he never drank from her glass. How he smiled when she winced from another dizzy spell. The night she found the vial changed everything. She dropped a pen under the desk in his private study, an office she wasn't meant to enter without permission. But Richard was out, and curiosity, that old friend of hers, whispered louder than caution. She reached for the pen and found instead a velvet box wedged behind the filing cabinet. Inside 3 unlabeled vials, a faded pharmacy bag, and a slip of paper with 2 words written in his precise architectural hand. Mercury chloride. That night she didn't drink the tea. Instead, she poured it into the houseplants he was so fond of, little bonsais lined along the window. By morning, their leaves had withered into black lace, and Amara knew. She confronted him 2 days later. She waited until the sun was low, casting long orange beams across their penthouse. Her phone hidden on the countertop was already recording. "I found the vials," she said, voice steady despite the thundering in her chest. "In your study." Richard didn't blink. He set his coffee cup down with the calmness of a man adjusting a tie. "You've been going through my things. You've been poisoning your wife." The air between them thickened. A pause, then a slow smile measured cruel. "Clever girl," he said softly. "Too clever." In an instant, he was on her. His hand closed around her wrist, twisting until her phone slipped and clattered to the marble floor. His wedding ring dug into her skin as he squeezed. "You know what I love about mercury poisoning," he whispered against her ear. "It mimics madness. Tremors, paranoia, confusion. Everyone thinks you're unraveling. She fought to free herself, but her strength had been hollowed out by months of subtle destruction. You miscarried 6 months ago, he continued. No one would blame you for losing your mind. Amara's breath hitched. That wasn't a miscarriage, she whispered. No, it wasn't, Richard confirmed. But insurance payouts come faster when there are no heirs to complicate things. He released her wrist only to wrap his fingers around her throat. You think I'd let you ruin everything? Let you dilute my empire with distractions, crying brats sucking away the attention you should be pouring into me. Black spots danced in Amara's vision. She clawed at him, but her body had betrayed her. The poison had stolen her fire, and he knew it. Then, Surinashonchim, a sound, light footsteps from the hallway. Amara, a soft voice called, You okay? Carmela. Amara's 19-year-old sister, visiting from Atlanta, innocent, unaware. Oh God, Amara, rasped voice, barely a hiss. Run. But it was too late. Carmela stepped into the kitchen silk robe clinging to her frame. Her face shifted from confusion to recognition to horror. You said she was at her book club, Carmela whispered to Richard, eyes wide. Amara's world fractured again. The betrayal was louder than his fists. That moment, the grip on her neck, her sister's stunned face, the crash of everything she thought she understood, lived in her forever. But it wasn't the end. Not yet. Because in her last breath before darkness took her, Amara remembered something else. She was pregnant again, and this time she would survive. For them. Suryahurnran. The church had no choir, no bells, no stained glass to soften the cold light of dawn. Its bones had been forgotten by the city-boarded windows, pews rotted by time air perfumed with mildew and dust. But in the sheltering dark beneath its sanctuary, a miracle clawed its way into the world. Amara lay on a thin mattress layered over cracked tile, her breath rising in white clouds from the December chill. Sweat slicked her brow despite the cold as another contraction tore through her. Her fingers gripped a leather belt between her teeth to muffle the scream. Push, baby, push again. They're coming whether this storm wants them or not. Sister Mercy's voice cut through the thunder above them. The woman was not a nun, not anymore, but her presence radiated something holy. Former war nurse, underground midwife, her hands, though weathered with age, moved with certainty. She had caught babies in war zones, under gunfire, and refugee camps. She would catch Amara's too. Please, Amara gasped. They're too early. They're strong, Mercy said firmly. You hear me? These babies are fighters, just like their mama. Above them, the storm raged like judgment. It had been 6 months since Amara fled Richard's penthouse bleeding and terrified, a hard drive of evidence hidden in a hollowed sculpture and her womb heavy with secrets. For 6 months, she had disappeared into the tapestry of the forgotten. Abandoned shelters, underground networks, women who recognized the look in her eyes and passed her from one safe place to another like a sacred relic. She hadn't spoken Richard's name since. Not once, not even in her own mind. And now his legacy was tearing her apart from the inside. She's crowning. The words shot through Amara like lightning. No, she sobbed, not yet. I'm not ready. But her body did not wait for readiness. It moved with ancient purpose. Her back arched, the room blurred, and then a wet rush, a silence that felt like a scream. Why isn't he crying? Amara's heart twisted. She tried to rise, but pain anchored her to the mattress. Mercy cradled the tiny form in trembling hands. Come on, little one. Breathe. The room filled with whispers, some in Spanish, some in tongues Amara didn't recognize. A circle of women knelt in prayer, wrapping the birth in reverence. Amara reached out blindly. Please, not him too. I've lost enough. She pressed her lips to her son's forehead. Cold, damp, too still. Fight, she whispered. Please, baby, fight for me, for your sister, for the life I can't promise, but I'll give everything to protect. And as if summoned by the tremble in her voice, the baby gasped, then wailed. A thin, furious cry that made the windows shudder and the candles flicker. Amara broke into sobs, cradling his tiny frame. That's my boy, that's my fighter. But Mercy didn't let her rest. We're not done yet. Second one's turned wrong. She's coming breech. The pain returned with a vengeance. Hands inside her twisting, guiding. Mercy's voice lost its warmth, replaced by clinical focus. Stay with me, Amara. Stay here. Don't you float away, you hear me? Blood pooled beneath her. Too much. Someone cried for more towels. Another muttered about the hospital. No hospitals, Amara growled through gritted teeth. He'll find us. He'll take them. Then hold on, girl, Mercy said. Because this baby's coming feet first. The agony blurred into something else, grief, fear, defiance. When the second child slid into the world, she did not cry. Mercy bent over her lips to her tiny mouth, forcing breath into lungs that had known only shadows. And then at last another cry, weaker but full of will. She's stubborn, Mercy murmured, wrapping her in a towel, just like her mama. Amara opened her arms. They placed both children against her chest skin to skin their hearts beating against hers. A boy and a girl, born in the dark, born in hiding, born of love and betrayal and impossible hope. I name you, she whispered through her exhaustion. Jalen, the pathmaker. You will lead. And Zuri, my hope. You are everything still beautiful in this world. The flashlight flickered and died. Darkness cloaked them again. I'm bleeding too much, Amara said quietly. Aren't I? You're not dying today, Mercy replied. I won't allow it. But Amara felt herself slipping. Her body had given all it had. She floated above the scene, watching from somewhere far and warm. She saw her own face tired, blood-stained, yet somehow radiant. A mother forged in fire. Then movement above. Cars, lights, voices. Dogs, someone whispered. They have dogs. They're looking for her. Mercy made a decision. Take her through the tunnel. You four go. I'll stay and stall them. Mercy, I've handled men like him before you were born. Now go. Raise those babies to be better than him. The passage behind the old altar led to the city's underbelly. A maintenance shaft, a river of sewage rats for company. But Amara didn't notice. Every step was a triumph. Every footfall was defiance. She held her babies close, her bare feet slicing on concrete, her dress clinging like a shroud. They emerged into the icy light of dawn. Chicago shimmered, unaware that 3 ghosts had risen from the grave. A woman met them near the L train, weathered coat, tired eyes, a kindness that made Amara weep. You need help, the woman said. And I know someone, a vet. He treats our kind. Quiet, cash only. Amara nodded. She could no longer speak. The twins stirred against her chest. Jalen yawned. Zuri nuzzled deeper into warmth. Her babies, her heart made flesh. Born beneath a church without angels, but holy nonetheless. And alive. Sophir Septemwas. The attic apartment in Little Village was barely wider than a freight elevator and creaked with every wind gust from the L train below. But to Amara, it was a palace compared to the grave she had nearly become. The windows were small and dusty, the walls patched with mismatched plaster, but sunlight still found its way in slanting through the cracks each morning, as if determined to witness something sacred. She lived simply, quietly, a name erased. To the world, she was Maya Ellis, now an artist who sold pottery at street fairs and worked the late shift cleaning offices downtown. She told the landlord she was a widow from Baton Rouge. No questions were asked. Jalen and Zuri, now toddling on wobbly legs and brimming with defiance, believed the world to be a grand puzzle, and every corner of their tiny apartment a new piece to discover. Their laughter filled the silence Richard Sterling had tried to leave her in, but the fear never left her. It sat beside her in the night when the twins fell asleep. It whispered in the hush of early morning when she stirred their oatmeal and checked the locks twice, then 3 times. It breathed from the newspaper clippings she carefully trimmed and folded each week, rituals of survival and reckoning. It began with a single origami crane. She folded it from a gossip column. The article mocked her Sterling's first wife, still missing after 8 years, new details. Hints she faked her own death. The arrogance made her hands tremble. But rather than rage, she reached for paper. Fold by fold, she calmed herself. It was something she'd done since childhood, making beauty out of ruin. When the crane was complete, she placed it in a plain envelope with no return address and mailed it to Sterling Global's headquarters. No note, no signature, just the bird, its wings spread as if in flight. A symbol, a warning, a promise. After that, the birds multiplied. 1 every month. Always from different cities, she mailed them from neighboring counties, borrowed P.O. boxes, gas stations along the highway. Always from a different hand in different stamps, but folded by the same tired fingers. She used headlines about him, his mergers, his lawsuits, his wedding announcements, his betrayals. Each crane flew across the miles and landed on his mahogany desk, a whisper wrapped in paper. "You didn't kill me. I'm still watching." Zuri at age 4 once asked Mama, "Why do your birds always look sad?" Amara had paused mid-fold. "They're not sad," she whispered. "They're remembering." Jalen tilted his head. "What are they remembering?" She looked at him, then his eyes so much like Richard's but kinder, gentler. "A promise," she said. "One I haven't broken." By night, she sculpted in silence. Clay was her therapy, but it was paper that carried her rage. The attic grew heavy with the weight of folded wings. Hundreds of birds lined the rafters, pinned to string, fluttering gently when the trains passed. Some days she caught herself talking to them. "You saw it all," she murmured to one made from a Fortune magazine. "You know what he did." They stared back, patient and still. And then the dreams began. They came in fragments, corridors that stretched into infinity, rooms with outdoors mirrors that showed her holding only one child. In every dream, a man stood at the far end watching, always in shadow. She would run toward him, fists clenched, lungs burning, only to find him vanish when she reached out. Sometimes he left a trail of silver rings in his wake, other times broken teacups. But always, always, she woke with a start, drenched in sweat, a scream lodged in her throat. One bitter winter night, Amara heard a knock. She froze. No one knocked here. Not at this hour. The twins were asleep. She crept to the door, barefoot, heart in her mouth. Another knock, firmer. She pressed her eye to the peephole. A figure stood in the hallway, backlit. A man in a trench coat, face obscured by a wide-brim hat. Panic surged. She reached for the bat under the sink. Then he turned and left. Nothing left behind, no sound. Except one folded crane, tucked into the edge of the doorframe. But she hadn't folded this one. The paper was white, clean. It bore no words, no headlines. Just a small, faint scent orange blossom. Amara collapsed to her knees. It was him. He knew. From that night forward, she folded no more birds. Instead, she turned inward, preparing. She trained her body back to strength, small workouts with the twins. She taught herself legal terms, watched court videos, learned the system that had failed her once. And she taught her children too. She taught them how to walk with their heads high, how to see through lies, how to speak truth without trembling. And she never used Richard's name. He was only ever called the Storm, because that was what he had been, what he still was. But storms could be survived. And sometimes storms could be silence. In the attic of paper birds and shadows, Amara Bennett plotted not revenge, but revelation. Because some truths don't scream, they unfold, one crease at a time. There was no gate, no headstones, no flowers. Only a quiet patch of land behind an abandoned Lutheran church where dandelions grew tall and the earth sagged like it remembered. It wasn't a real cemetery. No records, no marble, no mourners, but the wind. But to Jalen and Zuri, it was sacred, a place where their imaginations had carved out grief with the precision only children could manage. This was where they believed their father lay, and it was where Amara let them believe it. They were 6 when the question sharpened. "Did Daddy die in a fire?" Jalen asked one evening as they sat cross-legged on the floor building towers from old soup cans. Amara's fingers paused mid-fold over a piece of paper. "No," she said softly, "not a fire." "Then how?" Zuri asked, tilting her head. "Was it sickness, a war?" "No," Amara whispered. "Not a war, but something close." She never said his name, not once. Instead, she gave them pieces of poetry when they begged for truth. "He left before he could know you, and I had to protect you from the part of him that wanted to stay." That was enough for a while. It was Zuri who found the place, a crumbling field behind a forgotten church, blocks from their apartment. Wild weeds, broken angel statues, their faces worn smooth by time. She tugged Jalen's sleeve and said, "This looks like where he might be." He nodded. And so they began to visit, quietly in the early light before school or after the sun dipped behind the city's gray shoulders. They brought little offerings, leaves shaped like hearts, bottle caps, polished with rainwater, dandelions, folded cranes. They would kneel side by side and whisper stories. "Daddy," Jalen said one day, his voice earnest, "I got an A in reading." Zuri drew a dog that looked like a real one. Mama's working too much again, but she smiles more now. Zuri chimed in. We saved you a jelly bean, the blue kind. They placed it gently in the dirt and patted the ground as if it could feel. Amara discovered their secret months later. She'd followed the trail of petals, found their crayon drawings on stones. A simple wooden stick tied with ribbon marked the imagined grave. On it, scrawled in Zuri's crooked letters, Daddy Sterling, loved but gone. Amara stood there a long time. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in years. But her chest ached as if it were cracking open. Not with anger, not with fear, but with guilt. Because for all her efforts to erase his presence, the ghost of Richard Sterling had bloomed in her children's hearts like a question she couldn't answer. That night she made warm milk and sat them down. There are things you don't know about your father, she began. The twins leaned in curious but calm. I didn't bury him, she continued, because he's not dead. Their eyes widened but not in shock. We know, Zuri said simply. We felt it. Amara blinked. You, what? Jalen nodded. We don't know how, but we just do. Sometimes I dream about him. Not his face, but his shadow, like a lion watching from the tall grass. Zuri whispered, he's looking for us. Amara's breath caught. And what do you feel, she asked carefully. Like we have to be ready, Jalen said, for when he finds us. Amara reached for their hands. Then we'll be ready, together. That spring, the makeshift cemetery bloomed. They planted forget-me-nots, not for him, but for what he'd never become, for the father they had imagined and deserved, gentle presence safe. Amara didn't stop them anymore. She brought her own offerings, too. Not jelly beans or paper birds, but stories. She told them about her favorite mug, how Richard had bought it at a street market in Lisbon, how he made her laugh once so hard she spilled coffee all over a manuscript. I loved him once, she admitted, and that love gave me you. But I had to leave so that love wouldn't destroy us. The children listened without flinching. They were no longer afraid of truth. One gray afternoon, a woman from the neighborhood spotted them kneeling there and asked gently, Is this where your family's buried? Zuri looked up and smiled. No, just someone we had to let go of. And that was the beginning of the legend. Cemetery with no name, where flowers bloomed though no one was buried, where children came to leave secrets, where grief lived quietly without marble or fanfare. Amara once told Mercy, who still sent letters from whatever underground corner she'd fled to, they mourn a man who never died, but they do it in their own way. I won't rob them of that. It's their love to carry, not his shame. Mercy wrote back, then you've already won. Years later, long after the world would know their story, people still visited that field. They said it had peace to it, like someone had wept there until something holy took root. No headstones, no records, just memory, and a little wooden stick that once read, Love but gone. Fotsini no one, Surin no one. The gallery smelled of clay dust and memory. Hidden in the heart of a refurbished textile mill on Chicago's South Side, it bore no sign, no curator's name, only a gold leaf letter M carved above the entrance and the warm hum of voices that swelled with evening light. It had become an underground sensation. Critics called it raw, visceral, the chapel of reclaimed grief. But few knew the truth. The woman behind Gallery M was a ghost. Amara Bennett, once known to the world as the wife of Richard Sterling, had built this haven with her bare hands. Brick by brick, kiln by kiln, piece by piece. Her work, once stifled beneath a penthouse ceiling, now stood in brilliant defiance under beams stained with time and sunlight. And it spoke. Oh, how it spoke. There were no nameplates on the exhibits. Visitors wandered through without a guide, drawn only by instinct. Some cried before they knew why. Others stood in silence before sculptures that seemed to pulse with unspoken truth. A cracked teacup mounted on copper wire, suspended midair, as if in the act of falling. A ceramic cradle empty but warm to the touch. Two tiny clay hands reaching up from a shadowy base, one of them slightly crooked. Jalen and Zuri had modeled for that piece. Amara had spent hours molding their hands in silence, watching them sleep, sculpting hope into every crevice. But the centerpiece of the exhibit was a towering installation titled The Chamber. It was a room within a room. Visitors entered through a narrow arch and found themselves surrounded by walls of folded porcelain birds, glazed white but veined with gold. Each bore the faint impression of a headline. Billionaire Sterling donates $5 million to Children's Hospital. Where is the vanished first wife? Richard Sterling marries again. A phoenix rises. The birds did not sing, but if you stood still, you could hear something, a hush, a breath, a heartbeat. On opening night, Amara didn't wear black. She wore saffron, bold, defiant, sunlit. The gallery buzzed with anticipation. Collectors from New York, critics from London, even dignitaries from LA had come not knowing they were walking into a woman's reclamation of self. She kept to the shadows, watching them react. An older woman wept silently in front of a ceramic torso wrapped in barbed copper. A young couple held hands as they walked through the chamber, their fingers tightening with every step. But it wasn't until he arrived that the air truly shifted. Richard Sterling didn't knock. He never had. He walked in like he belonged, like the gallery bore his name. His suit was sharp as ever, his salt and pepper hair perfectly disheveled. But the light in his eyes, something was different. He moved slowly, carefully, almost reverently. Amara saw him before he saw her. She remained behind the columns, body still heart racing. Every cell screamed to run, or fight, or disappear. Instead, she watched. He paused in front of the cradle. His face, always unreadable, twitched. Then he walked into the chamber. His hand brushed a bird. It trembled slightly. And then he saw her reflection in the mirrored wall ahead. Their eyes met not directly, but through glass, like strangers, peering into parallel dimensions. He didn't turn around, didn't speak, just stared, his breath fogging the mirror. When he finally moved again, it wasn't toward her. It was out the door. No security, no lawyers, no press. Just Richard Sterling retreating, as if haunted. Amara didn't follow. She sank to a bench, hands trembling. For years, she had dreamed of this moment, of confronting him, screaming truth into his sculpted silence, unveiling the monster beneath the charm. But in that quiet gallery, she realized something far deeper than vengeance. He no longer held power, not over her, not over her children, not over the art that now spoke in the voices he tried to erase. He was a relic now, a shadow, a ghost in a gallery built from survival. Later that night, after the last guest left and the gallery stood hushed in reverence, Amara unlocked a small drawer behind the reception desk. Inside lay a stack of unopened letters. From Carmela. The betrayal still throbbed, but so did the memory of girlhood, bare feet on southern porches, whispered dreams shared under summer moons, blood and laughter and childhood stitches. She had never read them, but now perhaps she would. Zuri and Jalen were asleep upstairs in the loft space, above the gallery, curled together like bookends, dreambound. Amara climbed the spiral staircase and stood for a moment watching them. Zuri murmured in her sleep, "He was here, wasn't he?" "Yes," Amara whispered, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "But it doesn't matter." "Was he angry?" "No," she said, her voice steady. "He was lost." That night, the porcelain birds didn't tremble when the wind passed. They remained still, as if satisfied. Because sometimes the loudest victory is silence, and sometimes the most powerful haunting is presence. Amara lit a candle by the window, not for Richard, not even for justice, but for herself, for the girl who once believed she'd never escape, and for the woman who had and built a gallery out of the ashes. Yatimamam. There are children who grow up in safety, whose memories are built on lullabies and birthday candles. And then there are children like Jalen and Zuri, raised with whispers instead of lullabies, truths sharpened into tools and silence that rang louder than screams. By the time they turned 9, they had already learned the weight of knowing too much. It began subtly. Jalen, always the observant one, had started shadowing Amara in ways that felt more protective than playful. He stood guard when she spoke to unfamiliar men, watched her reflection in mirrors with eyes too old for his freckled face. He'd mastered the art of listening without being seen. And Zuri, oh Zuri. Zuri had developed a habit of writing questions she never dared speak aloud. She'd slip them beneath Amara's pillow at night, folded tightly, always written in blue ink. One read, "If he ever finds us, do we run again?" Another, "Did you love him when you had us?" Amara never responded with ink. She answered with action, an extra kiss on the forehead, an open bedtime storybook, with a mother who saved kingdoms, a whispered, "You're safe now in the dark." But even her arms couldn't shield them from the world beyond the gallery. Their school had become a risk. A new teacher had mentioned something during a parent conference, how the twins had a unique way of reading adults, how they saw through things too easily. "They're smart," the teacher had said, lips pursed. "But there's something else, like they're always waiting for something bad to happen." Amara clenched her hands under the table. "That's because something bad did happen. She withdrew them from school 2 weeks later. It wasn't safe anymore. Instead, she found a retired professor named Mrs. Elsie Truitt, once a literature scholar, now a widow who lived in a sunlit apartment above a bakery. She agreed to homeschool them for modest pay in exchange for Amara's clay teacups and stories. It was unconventional, but the twins flourished. They read Baldwin before most kids tackled chapter books. They memorized Langston Hughes and debated legal ethics over toast. They were taught that history was not just facts, it was lived, survived, reshaped. And they learned that secrets could be both poison and protection. It was Jalen who found the hidden drive. He hadn't meant to. He was chasing Zuri during a thunderstorm, their laughter echoing through the gallery, when he tripped behind the sculpture of the cracked teacup. His hand brushed a hollowed compartment sealed with clay. Inside, a small black flash drive labeled in Amara's delicate script, "Only if I disappear." He brought it to her without a word. She sat down heavily on the bench, the weight of years pressing against her spine. "You weren't supposed to find this yet," she said softly. "Are you disappearing?" Zuri asked. "No," Amara answered. "Not anymore. But there was a time I thought I'd have to." She didn't stop them from watching what was on it. They saw everything. The vials, the doctor's reports, the footage from that terrible night, Amara's bruised face, Richard's hissed threats caught by a hidden phone mic, and most damning of all, a notarized letter from Richard's lawyer, sealed and scanned, instructing how to dissolve a trust if the twins are ever declared illegitimate. "Illegitimate," Zuri repeated in a whisper, "like we're fake." Amara knelt before her, eyes stinging. "No, you're more real than anything I've ever made." But to him, people were only real if they obeyed. Jalen clenched his fists. "He's still out there, isn't he?" "Yes." "Does he know we know?" "Not yet," Amara said, "but he will." After that day, the twins changed again. Not colder, not angrier, but clearer. Zuri began sculpting with Amara, her little hands clumsy at first, then graceful, then devastatingly precise. Her pieces were small and personal, a broken ring mended with gold, a single eye crying into a clay bowl, a child's face turned away. Jalen took to organizing, scanning documents, logging evidence, even building a password-protected folder titled Contingency. Amara watched them both and felt the familiar ache return, love and fear entwined so tightly they choked the breath. She had never wanted to raise warriors. She had wanted to raise artists, readers, dreamers. But sometimes the world chooses for you. One night they sat together on the gallery floor beneath the canopy of porcelain birds. Zuri lay with her head in Amara's lap. Jalen sat cross-legged, holding one of the birds gently. "Do you think he dreams about us?" he asked. Amara paused. "I think he dreams about control." "And what do we dream about?" Zuri asked. Amara smiled faintly, brushing curls from her daughter's brow. "About choosing who we become. That's the difference." Later that week, a man appeared at the gallery. Not Richard, but someone close. He wore a tailored coat and a crooked smile. "Ms. Bennett," he said, extending a gloved hand. "My name is Thomas Creed. I represent your ex-husband's interest in certain family matters." The twins watched from the stairwell. Zuri whispered, "He smells like courtrooms." Jalen's jaw clenched, and threats. Creed handed Amara an envelope. "You've been requested to attend a meeting. Quiet, private, for closure." Amara didn't open the envelope. She simply looked him in the eye and said, "Tell Richard I don't do closure. I do consequences." Creed tilted his head. "Then I hope your children are ready." "They were born ready," she said, "unlike him." That night, Amara sat between her children. She didn't read a story. She told them one. About a woman made of clay who was broken and burned, but rebuilt herself from the pieces, who raised two stars in the dark and taught them to shine not despite the shadows, but because of them. And the children smiled. Because they already knew. They had always known. Kunemwan. The invitation came in the form of a white linen envelope, hand-delivered by a courier in a gray suit with eyes like polished steel. It bore no return address, no official seal, just a simple embossed logo of intertwined letters ARRS. Richard Sterling. Amara unfolded the card slowly, her fingers steady, but her breath taut. An exclusive collector's gala celebrating the rebirth of legacy and family. One night only, private showing, RSVP essential. At the bottom in the corner, a scrawl in ink, unmistakably his "You owe me a dance." The gallery had always been her sanctuary, but now it felt like a stage. For days, Amara moved through it like a soldier in enemy territory, checking door locks, camera angles, blind spots. She erased every trace of the children's presence. Toys, hidden sketches, boxed clayworks covered. She wasn't sure if she would go, but her heart had already decided. Not for closure, not for fear, for exposure. Mercy called from a number that no longer worked the next day. "You're not going to that gallery, are you?" Amara answered with silence. Mercy exhaled. "He wants to control the narrative. Don't let him." "I won't," Amara said quietly. "I'm going to write the ending myself." "You better not let that man touch a hair on your head, you hear me? I won't be alone." Indeed, she wouldn't. Jalen and Zuri had grown quiet, their expressions sharpened like flint. They knew without being told. Zuri had crafted two delicate necklaces, pendants, made from porcelain shards. Inside each, she tucked a GPS microchip and a drop of her mother's blood just in case. Jalen borrowed Mercy's old burner phone and rigged a live feed from his laptop, coding a delay-proof stream that could be released with a keystroke. "This isn't just art anymore," he told her, his voice solemn. "It's testimony." The night arrived wrapped in silk and secrets. Amara wore red. Not the soft burgundy of past betrayals, but a crimson so fierce it dared anyone to approach. Her dress clung like armor. Her hair, pulled high in coiled defiance, revealed the full height of her neck, a gesture of vulnerability and dominance all at once. The gallery, oddly enough, was not hers. This space was Richard's, a converted bank in River North, with marble columns, vaulted ceilings, and guards who spoke through earpieces. The air smelled of money and the walls hummed with curated lies. The guests sipped gold-rimmed champagne and whispered in tones just loud enough to be overheard. "That's her, isn't it? The first wife, she vanished for years. Now she's back and dripping in mystique. His art is supposed to be about forgiveness." Amara ignored them all, until she saw him. Richard stood beneath a painting too grand to be honest, an abstract smear of black and red and ivory. The plaque beneath read, "Rebirth through flame." He turned at her approach, a smile already forming. "Amara," he said like a prayer or a possession. "Richard," her voice was glass. "You've always loved metaphors. Art has always been our language," he said, offering a hand. "I was hoping we could speak it again. Privately." She didn't take his hand. "You already know I didn't come here to listen." No, his eyes glinted. "Then why are you here?" "To watch you implode," she said sweetly, "in high definition." He laughed, and it was still that same rich, rehearsed sound. "You're still as dramatic as ever." "And you're still pretending to be a man," she replied. "Let's drop the performance, Richard. You didn't invite me for art. You invited me for control." He leaned in slightly. "And you came because you're tired of running." "No," she whispered. "I came because I finally stopped." She turned and clapped once. Behind her, a side wall of the gallery, innocuous and unnoticed, until now slid open to reveal a screen. The room darkened. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the footage began to play. Not the footage Richard had doctored for courtrooms and media. The real footage. Of the night he poisoned her tea, of the bruises hidden by silk, of the documents ordering the erasure of her children's inheritance, of him unguarded, cruel, forgetting the camera embedded in the sculpture by her bedside. Every mask he'd worn cracked in front of eyes too powerful to ignore. The silence afterward was vast and heavy. Then someone clapped, one pair of hands, then another and another, until applause filled the room, not for Amara's pain, but for her refusal to let it be rewritten. Richard stood motionless, his lips tight, jaw clenched. "You think this will ruin me?" he hissed. "No," Amara said, her eyes soft and unyielding. "Your silence already has." Security began to shift toward her, but Richard held up a hand. No need, he said coolly. Let her go. Let the world judge. But his eyes betrayed him. For the first time, Richard Sterling looked afraid. Not of exposure, but of her. The woman who had once kissed his wounds now carried her own like metals. She walked past him without looking back, her heels striking the marble like thunder. Zuri and Jalen waited outside, their eyes wide with both fear and triumph. Amara knelt and kissed them both. We just turned the gallery into a courtroom, she whispered. And the verdict, the truth. That night, 100 guests told 100 different versions of the event. But only one version mattered. A woman walked into a trap and turned it into a reckoning. With porcelain courage and red silk armor. Ulan. The morning after the gallery reckoning, the city did not rise gently. Headlines bled across every screen and paper. Sterling exposed art show turns into live accusation. Amara Bennett breaks silence in sculpted showdown. The woman behind the ghost of Billionaire's reckoning. But Amara wasn't watching. She was packing. Not to run, to prepare. Because she knew Richard, and Richard never lost quietly. He waited 2 days. 2 days of silence. Then he summoned her not with another invitation, but a court order. A subpoena, personal, hand-delivered to her gallery doorstep. Amara unfolded it and read the line that made her stomach tighten. Sterling v. Bennett emergency petition for custody evaluation. He was going after her children. They met in a cold glass building downtown, neutral ground, neutral tone, but there was nothing neutral about the air between them. The mediation office had wide windows that stretched toward the lake, pretending serenity. But beneath the table, Amara's knuckles were pale from pressure. Across from her sat Richard, unmoved, unbothered. I thought we were done with theatrics, he said smoothly, adjusting his cufflinks. She didn't answer. You humiliated me, Amara. In front of my board, the press collectors. In front of the truth, she interrupted, voice like velvet pulled tight. Let's not forget that part. His smile didn't touch his eyes. And now you've crossed into something I can't forgive. You never forgave, she said. You erased. The mediator cleared her throat, pretending to control the room. We're here to discuss the children? Richard leaned back, folding one leg over the other. Yes, my children. They're not pawns, Amara snapped. They're heirs, Richard replied. And I will not let them be raised in secrecy and paranoia. They deserve structure, legacy, name. They have my name, she said, her voice hardening. And they have love. Love doesn't write checks, Amara. It doesn't buy protection. It doesn't open Ivy League doors. No, she said quietly. But it teaches them not to become you. The room pulsed with tension. The mediator tried again. Mr. Sterling, your claims suggest concern about the mother's stability. Do you have medical documentation? Richard pulled a file from his briefcase. Hospitalizations, disappearance, a documented past of delusion. He slid the papers across the table. Amara didn't touch them. Instead, she reached into her own bag and pulled out a single photograph. Zuri and Jalen laughing under a blanket fort, faces radiant with the kind of joy no money could fake. They know who they are, she said, and they know who you are. Richard's hand trembled slightly before he hit it. After the session ended, he followed her into the corridor. You think you've won because you embarrass me, he said low and sharp. You think a few sculptures and headlines can destroy me. No, Amara said, turning slowly to face him. But truth can. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a breath. And I'm not done yet. That night, Jalen sat by the gallery window, staring into the dark. He's trying to take us, he said. Yes, Amara answered. But he won't. Zuri curled into her mother's side. He's afraid, isn't he? Amara nodded. Of what you'll become, of what I've already become. The next morning, they went to the courthouse. Not to defend, to file. Amara Bennett, with her chin lifted and palms steady, submitted a counterclaim. Attempted poisoning, coercive control, financial manipulation. Evidence, witnesses, a detailed timeline. And one final document, a request for a protective injunction, not just for herself, but for her children. When the clerk asked her if she was ready to proceed with litigation against one of the country's most powerful men, she simply replied, yes, I've already faced the devil. Outside the courthouse, press cameras waited like vultures. Microphones, flashbulbs. But Amara didn't flinch. She stepped into the light not as a victim, not even as a survivor, as a mother, a witness, a woman who would not be silent again. Behind her, Zuri clutched her hand. Jalen walked a step ahead, shoulders straight. And for the first time, the shadow of Richard Sterling did not stretch far enough to reach them. The devil had shown his face, and the world was finally watching. They said it would never reach trial, that someone like Richard Sterling was too powerful to be brought to court, too insulated to ever fall. But they underestimated the power of memory, of mothers, of children who had learned not only to survive, but to document. And so the reckoning was set, not in back rooms, not in silence, but in a courtroom with bright lights and sharper cameras. Televised, live. The court streamed the proceedings under public interest statutes, domestic violence, child custody, corporate abuse, and the growing concern over private influence in the justice system. Viewership broke records within hours. People didn't just watch, they chose sides. Hashtags bloomed like wildfire across every platform. Jiriyaku Amara's truth, Jennifer's sterling silence. Purnawar the clay witness. The world wanted a show. Amara gave them testimony. Day one, Richard's legal team walked in wearing smug smiles and $1,000 suits. Amara walked in with her hands wrapped in linen clay gloves, both for protection and message. The prosecutor opened with a quiet but cutting line. This is not a story of wealth. This is a story of wounds. Gasps came within the first hour. The jury saw the video, a 2-minute recording from 8 years ago, hidden in the ceramic lamp beside Amara's bed. Richard's voice low and venomous as he threatened her for refusing to drink the damn tea. He never hit her on camera, but the words were worse. You think they'll believe a woman who disappeared? You're clay in my hands. By day 3, Richard's empire began to shake. Corporate sponsors pulled out. Charity boards released statements. Investors called emergency meetings. But still, he didn't crumble. Not yet. Instead, he took the stand himself. His voice was calm. He looked into the camera, into the jury, into the soul of America, and said, I loved her. She was unstable. I tried to help. She ran. She stole my children. He wept, but his eyes didn't. Then it was Amara's turn. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a dark blouse and her wedding ring still cracked from the day she smashed it with a kiln hammer. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She told her story like a sculptor revealing shape from formless clay. I left because I was dying emotionally, mentally, and one day almost physically. I left because he didn't just hurt me. He tried to erase me. She paused, then added softly, but I rebuilt myself, and I raised my children with the truth. The courtroom was so silent, the hum of the light sounded like thunder. The prosecution brought in experts. A toxicologist confirmed traces of sedatives once used to manipulate behavior. A child psychologist spoke of the twins' remarkable emotional intelligence, not in spite of trauma, but because they were taught how to name it. Even Mercy testified, sweating shaky but unwavering. She begged me to leave with her. I was too scared. I watched her fade, and I said nothing. Then came Zuri, 14 eyes lit with quiet fire. She sat tall, chin lifted. When I was little, she said, I thought my father was a ghost. Now I know he's not. He's a man, and he's afraid of truth. Jalen followed. I coded a system to protect my mom, he explained, because I knew no one else would. Someone in the gallery wept audibly. The judge didn't stop them. Day 9. Amara's closing words. I don't want his money. I don't want revenge. I want recognition that a woman's disappearance was never absence. It was escape and return and defiance. Richard's closing words. I'm the victim here of lies, of hysteria, of betrayal. The jury took less than 4 hours. Guilty of coercion, of custodial manipulation, of reputational defamation, of attempted harm. The civil suit followed immediately. He would lose custody rights, lose controlling shares in his own company, lose the right to silence what had been spoken. That evening, Amara stood on the courthouse steps. Microphones hovered. Cameras rolled. A sea of faces stretched before her. But she wasn't thinking of them. She was thinking of her daughter's hands sculpting fire into beauty, her son's quiet strength. The woman she'd once been bruised, trembling alone on a rainy curb 8 years ago. I told my children, she said softly, that we don't run anymore, that we don't disappear, we create, we speak, we stay. She looked up, her voice carrying not with volume, but with truth. And we win. The reckoning had been televised. But what the world didn't realize was the victory had already happened long before the verdict. It happened in the attic of porcelain birds, in whispered bedtime stories, in every choice to survive one more day. It had happened in love, real love, the kind that tells the truth even when it hurts. And now finally the world was listening. Community. The summit was not her idea. It began as a whisper among galleries, then an email from an art foundation in New York. Would Amara Bennett consider speaking at the Women in Legacy Forum, a private gathering? St. Regis. Attendees from international media philanthropy, justice and creative circles. A keynote on art, motherhood, and reclamation. At first, she almost deleted it. What more was there to say after a courtroom broadcast her soul to the world? But then she thought of Zuri's porcelain pendants, Jalen's encryption folder, Mercy's trembling voice at the witness stand. The world didn't just need truth, it needed women who would stand in the aftermath and say, I'm still here. So Amara said yes. The St. Regis Hotel in Lower Manhattan rose like a crown over Fifth Avenue, all brass and velvet tradition and hauteur. Amara arrived with no entourage, just her and a leather case containing one small sculpture, a broken teacup mended with clay and gold resting inside a glass box. The air was too cold, the lobby too polished. But the view from the conference room floor-to-ceiling windows facing the storm-gray Atlantic made her feel grounded. The sea didn't care who she was. It simply moved, change persisted. So would she. The event was invitation only. No cameras, no reporters. Just powerfully curious women, CEOs, senators, survivors, artists. The room hummed with money and memory. Amara watched them watch her. Not with pity, with curiosity. They had seen the trial. They had seen the headlines. Now they wanted to meet the woman who hadn't shattered. She stepped to the podium without notes, without armor, and she spoke. I've spent the last decade being defined by what I escaped. A marriage, a man, a fortune, a story. She looked out at them, met their eyes one by one. But what I want to talk about today is what I built instead. She paused. I built a home with no blueprint. I raised children without a surname the world respected. I made art from what tried to destroy me. Another pause, the room held its breath. Everyone says survivors are strong, but that word doesn't feel right, because strength implies we didn't break. I did break, many times, but I reformed, like clay and fire. Not perfect, just hardened in a new shape. After the talk, women lined up not for autographs, but for connection. A senator from Vermont clutched Amara's hand and whispered, I've never said this to anyone, but your story is mine too. A venture capitalist pressed a business card into her palm. Whatever you want to build next, I'll back it. Even a gallery director from Tokyo leaned in and said, your children's pieces, they belong in the world. But it was the last woman who stopped her cold. Carmela, hair darker now, voice softer, eyes older. I asked to come, she said quietly. They told me it was full, but I waited outside until someone didn't show. Amara stared at her for a long time. I wanted to say thank you, Carmela continued, for not telling the world what I did, for letting me disappear without destroying me. You did that part on your own, Amara said evenly. I know, Carmela's voice cracked. But I've spent every day since trying to rebuild something. A clinic, a women's health co-op. It's not enough. It's a start, Amara said. Then after a long silence, she added, come by the gallery sometime. Bring your hands, we'll sculpt something that doesn't lie. Carmela's eyes brimmed. She nodded once and left. That evening, Amara sat in her suite by the window, watching the tide pull back. Jalen called first. Zuri's making a piece called Balance. It's two wolves, one broken, one whole. She says it's about you. Amara smiled. That sounds like her. And I'm rewriting the code for the gallery archive. I'm going to open it up, let people leave stories like graffiti on the inside of the clay walls, anonymously, so they feel heard. You're building something, Amara whispered. We're just doing what you taught us. That night, a handwritten note was slipped under her door. No name, just 5 words, I believed you. Thank you. She placed it beside the mended teacup, the clay glowing faintly under lamplight. That was the thing about reckoning, it didn't end with a verdict. It echoed, it rippled. And sometimes it brought the very people who once disappeared back to themselves. When Amara checked out of the St. Regis the next morning, she left the sculpture with the concierge. Inside the glass box was a note. Let this sit here a while. For anyone who thinks beauty only comes unbroken. And she walked into the dawn. No headlines, no flashbulbs, just the hum of her own footsteps. And the quiet summit of a woman who had already climbed through fire and found herself at the top. Yo, autumn crept in quietly that year. The breeze along the Chicago riverfront carried a chill that whispered of endings. Leaves burned gold. Light angled low, and people began bundling against something invisible. But in the heart of the city, in a studio half buried beneath a community center, something strange stirred. A voice long silenced returned to the airwaves, and it began with 3 words: she was right. Amara was in her gallery when the first message came. A text from an unknown number, a simple link. At first she hesitated, years of caution etched into her muscles. But something about the phrasing pulled her in. She clicked, and there he was. Thomas Creed, Richard Sterling's former fixer, the man who had once threatened her with legal ruin and custody warfare, now sitting before a camera, gaunt and gray, speaking into a microphone with a voice weighed down by shame. The video was time-stamped 2 days ago. I was part of the machinery, Creed said, eyes hollow. I destroyed testimonies, altered timelines, intimidated doctors, helped erase a woman from her own life. He paused, rubbing his temples. And I did it for a man who convinced us all that control was loyalty. But the truth never dies, it just finds new ways to speak. Behind him, pinned to the wall, were dozens of documents, contracts, court memos, private medical records, evidence no one had seen before. Then came the bombshell. I was in the room when Richard ordered the poisoning. It was subtle, untraceable, tea laced with lorazepam and lithium, dosed low enough not to kill, just to confuse, disorient, break down her will. Creed's voice cracked. She didn't imagine it. She didn't flee out of madness. She escaped out of clarity. By the time Amara finished watching, the video had already hit 1 million views. It had been uploaded to an anonymous channel titled Broadcast from the Dead. The name chilled her, because for years she had felt dead. Dead in court, dead in name, dead in memory. And now her truth had risen through the very voice that once tried to bury it. Within hours, media descended. But this time they weren't circling for scandal. They came asking how she felt, how her children were coping, whether she would sue again. She answered none of them. Instead, she called Jalen. He had already seen the video. I saved it twice, he said. One to the archive, one to the blockchain. And Zuri, she sculpted something. Of course she did. Later that night, Amara stood in her studio and looked at Zuri's newest piece. It was a bust, smooth, pale, half of it polished to brilliance, the other jagged and crumbling. A mouth stitched in gold thread, and beneath it the title etched in clay, When the Monster Speaks. 2 days later, Creed was found dead in a motel just outside the city. Overdose, no signs of violence. Just a note that read, some debts can't be paid, but I hope truth counts for something. The world responded like a funeral with no body. Some called him a coward, some a hero too late. Amara called him neither. Confession doesn't erase complicity, she told Zuri, but it gives others the strength to step out of silence. Richard cornered and unraveling issued a statement. Through his lawyers, of course. Mr. Sterling denies all new allegations. He asserts that any testimony given under duress, mental illness, or addiction should be viewed with skepticism. But no one listened this time. The clay had hardened. The ghosts were talking. And even those once loyal to him began defecting. A gallery in Paris removed his portrait. His board voted to suspend him from executive duties. And the last of his old guard resigned quietly, one by one. Amara did not celebrate. She watched the storm from her rooftop, wrapped in a wool coat, sipping tea that she brewed herself, always herself. Do you think people like him ever feel it? Jalen asked as he joined her. What tornatuam? The weight of the lives they tried to crush. Amara took a slow breath. Only when no one's left to believe them. Zuri came up minutes later, her hands smudged with clay, her eyes bright. We need to make something big, she said. Not angry, not sad, just honest. Amara smiled. A memorial. No, a beginning. So they began again, not in silence, not in rage, but in clay, in code, in love shaped deliberately. Broadcast from the Dead would go on to publish two more testimonies, one from a private nurse who'd been silenced, another from an old friend of Richard's who finally admitted on air, "We all knew. We just didn't want to lose our invitations." And that was the true shift. Not the fall of a man, but the rise of voices once thought irrelevant. In a quiet hallway of Gallery M, Amara mounted a screen, looping silently the confessions played beside a piece titled, "The Room They Thought Would Never Speak." Visitors stood for hours, some wept, others stared, and one by one they left behind their stories' whispers on note card, clay fingerprints, small sculptures. It was no longer just her gallery. It was a cathedral of voices, a place where the dead didn't stay quiet. They testified. The courthouse on South Dearborn felt different this time. Not because the walls had changed, they were still pale stone, and sharp echoes still hung with portraits of judges, past men, whose eyes followed every woman like a silent verdict. But now something hung heavier in the air. Not fear, not dread, memory. And memory has a way of calling forth the ones we thought we buried. Amara Bennett stood once again beneath those marble arches, not to plead her case this time, she was there to close it. Richard Sterling had filed one final motion to suppress all media associated with broadcasts from the dead. His lawyers argued it was hearsay, that Thomas Creed's confession was a fabrication, that the new testimonies had no legal grounding, only emotional weight. But emotions had long since become evidence. Because what were bruises if not emotions made flesh? What was silence if not testimony delayed? Amara sat beside her attorney, her posture regal, her fingers folded tightly. On her lap rested a velvet pouch, inside it a shard of porcelain from her first sculpture, a reminder of where it began. Across from her, Richard looked pale age, his eyes sunken, his once impenetrable confidence now a brittle shell. He no longer tried to charm the courtroom. He simply watched it drift away from him. Because the ghosts were here now, not as spirits, but as truths finally given names. The judge, a black woman with silver coils of hair, read the motion with careful cadence. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes sharp. This courtroom is not a place to erase history. It is where history is confronted. And with that, she allowed the testimonies to stand. Creed's video played again, this time on the court's official record. And then came the unexpected. A woman entered, late, wearing a muted blue suit and trembling hands. She was not on any list. Her name, Dr. Marlene Hart, a retired pharmacologist, formerly employed by Sterling Health Solutions, and she had something to say. "I was instructed to dispose of medical reports. In 2017, she began, voice soft but steady. They were labeled private, top priority, but curiosity got the better of me." She held up a folder. What I found were detailed notes tracking Amara Bennett's behavior, her prescriptions, her dosages, notes comparing her speech patterns across months. She turned, looking directly at Richard. "You weren't treating her. You were documenting her decline because you designed it." The room fell into a hush so deep it seemed to collapse sound entirely. Richard didn't blink, but his lawyer did. A single bead of sweat ran down the side of his temple. After that, more ghosts emerged. A janitor who once worked late nights at the Sterling townhouse, who'd found shattered porcelain and hidden bloodstains in the laundry room. A chauffeur who drove Amara to a hospital under the name Marianne Bloom, told never to speak of it. A former board member who resigned quietly after overhearing the divorce must make her unfit to testify. Each voice small alone, together thunderous. By the end of the week, the judge requested that the case be sealed permanently for the children's protection, but not before allowing one final statement. From Amara. She rose slowly, walked to the center of the courtroom. No notes, no script. "I've often been asked why I didn't leave sooner," she said. "Why I disappeared, why I stayed silent." She looked at the rows behind her, full now with women journalists, students, mothers, full with the living. "Silence is never a choice for women like me. It's the condition we are given to survive." She took a breath. But silence, like clay, can be reshaped. She stepped down. No applause, no headline sound bites. Just truth left on the bench like a flower. The judge signed the final order. Sterling's motion denied. Permanent custody granted to Amara. Richard's parental access revoked. Indefinitely. As Amara exited the courtroom, a breeze caught in the hallway. It wasn't real, just a shift in air. But it felt like the dead passing through. Only this time they weren't weeping. They were smiling. Outside, the city moved as it always had, cars honking, pigeons dancing, people rushing between meetings and coffee. But to Amara, everything had slowed, like clay turning in a wheel before the shape emerges. Zuri waited on the steps. Jalen stood beside her. They didn't ask what happened. They already knew. Amara opened the velvet pouch, held the shard of porcelain to the sun. It gleamed not in spite of its fracture, but because of it. This courtroom, once a place of fear, had become something else. A graveyard of lies, a sanctuary of voices, a courtroom of ghosts finally heard. There are wounds that scream, and then there are the quiet ones, those that whisper from the bone, from memory, from the shadows behind your laughter. Amara knew both, but now for the first time in years, she also knew what it felt like to exhale without fear. The courtroom was behind her. The headlines had dulled. Richard's empire had become a cautionary tale, not a threat. And in the stillness that followed, healing arrived not as a miracle, but as a slow, deliberate art. She didn't start with clay. She started with breath, with waking up and not flinching when her phone chimed, with walking barefoot on the hardwood floor of the gallery, not to check locks, but to feel its warmth, with letting the silence stay a little longer before filling it with work. Mercy moved in temporarily, bringing with her a gentle chaos, half-written poetry, mismatched mugs, and a laugh that startled even Amara sometimes into giggles. Zuri rearranged her sculptures into constellations. Jalen coded a digital archive open to women worldwide, where stories could be told anonymously, preserved in light and sound. They weren't rebuilding a home, they were living in one. On a rain-heavy morning in late November, Amara stood before a fresh block of clay. For days she'd circled it, touched it, walked away, returned. Now finally her hands pressed into it, not with rage or desperation, but with a new rhythm. Slow, centered, listening. It wasn't a sculpture of Richard, or of suffering, or of survival. It was a woman. Not polished, not whole, but rising, her spine slightly curved from where, her hands outstretched, her mouth open as if mid-song. She called the piece Becoming. At the unveiling, the gallery brimmed not with the curious or the scandal-hungry, but with people who had followed her story for something more. Not just justice, but truth. And after truth, restoration. A mother from Milwaukee whispered, "My daughter follows you. She says your strength taught her how to leave." A social worker left behind a sketch of her first bruised client, now safe and alive. Even strangers brought gifts, bits of clay-pressed flowers, poems scribbled on ticket stubs. Each offering became part of a new installation, the archive of echoes. Not curated, not corrected, just heard. One evening, as twilight washed the gallery in amber, Amara hosted her first community workshop. She thought a few women might attend. Instead, over 60 came. Some with children, some with walkers, some with stories they never told aloud. And they sculpted, not masterpieces, but memories, hopes, self-portraits with fractured edges and gold-painted seams. In a corner of the room, Zuri guided a young girl, barely 10, through shaping her first figure. She says she wants it to be her grandma, Zuri told Amara. She says her grandma escaped too. Amara knelt beside the child. "What does she look like?" she asked. The girl answered without lifting her eyes from the clay. "She looks like someone who doesn't disappear." Later that night, Amara stood at the edge of the gallery, watching it glow from within. It no longer felt like a shelter, or a stage, or a fortress. It felt like a heartbeat. A rhythm born of pain, shaped by love and sustained by community. She went home late, carrying a box of half-finished figures and handwritten notes. Mercy was asleep on the couch, a novel open on her chest. Zuri and Jalen had already gone to bed. Amara placed the box beside her workbench, lit a small candle, and opened her journal. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote, "Healing is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of courage over and over again. And beneath it, tomorrow we begin the next piece. Not a reckoning, not a battle, but a rebirth." In fragments and fire, they had crafted a new world. And the most sacred part of it was this: They were no longer sculpting to be believed. They were sculpting simply to be, to remember, to honor, to live. And in that quiet, golden space between the past and the future, Amara found her greatest creation yet. Peace. Ban Noi begin writing the final part with a length of approximately 5,000 characters in a romantic storytelling style. Use graceful, refined, and emotionally persuasive language to captivate the audience. Include a call to action. ChatGPT John Noi Part 15. Let the world remember approx. 5,000 characters. Romantic storytelling style with a closing call to action. Winter arrived not with violence but with grace. Snow settled on Chicago like a whispered hush covering everything in a veil of stillness. The city slowed. The river stiffened beneath sheets of silver. Street lamps blinked against the quiet as if unsure whether to resist the dark or become part of it. In Gallery M, the windows shimmered with condensation and candlelight. Inside, warmth pulsed not from heat but from presence, from people, from stories etched into the very walls. And at the heart of it all stood Amara Bennett. She no longer walked like someone waiting for something to collapse. Her shoulders had softened. Her steps were light. Her eyes held the steadiness of someone who had been through a storm and now carried its rain in her bones but no longer feared the thunder. It had been a year since the trial, a year since the video, since the courtroom of ghosts, the summit at St. Regis, the unraveling of the Sterling name. But she had not marked the days in headlines or hearings. She marked them in clay. Zuri's sculptures now traveled globally. Her wolves and women and shattered vases with gold veins had become a language unto themselves. Jalen's open source project had grown into a living archive. Thousands of anonymous submissions poured in from women across continents, each one encoded, preserved, and honored in digital permanence. Mercy had published a memoir, its pages rippling with grief, guilt, and redemption. It became a bestseller not because of style, but because of soul. And Amara, she finally took her name back. Not just legally, spiritually. On the gallery's anniversary, Amara opened a final installation. One she had been shaping for years in her heart, but only now had the strength to release. The piece was called Let the World Remember. At first glance, it looked like a circle of faceless figures, each made of different materials: ceramic, iron, wood, glass, even salt. Some tall, some hunched, some broken in places, visibly stitched back together. But in the center of the circle was a single figure, a woman mid-step, neither reaching nor fleeing. Simply walking forward barefoot, her feet embedded in earth-colored clay. Her hands open, her head tilted upward not to the heavens, but to the people around her. And just above her, written in delicate script, she did not survive to be remembered. She lived to help others remember themselves. That night, the gallery overflowed with visitors, mothers with daughters, teachers, nurses, artists, survivors, even strangers who had never known Amara's story until it reached them through clay, through code, through whispers. They didn't come to gawk. They came to witness. And as they circled the figures, many left something behind. Rings, buttons, photos, ribbons, notes, folded and slipped gently at the feet of the sculptures. One child whispered, "This is what forever feels like." Amara watched from the mezzanine, hand wrapped in Zuri's Jalen standing behind them, with his arms crossed in proud silence. She didn't need to say anything. The gallery was speaking for her. Later, when the last candle flickered low and the final guest stepped into the snowy night, Amara remained. She walked barefoot through the installation, pressing her toes into the cold floor. Her hand brushed each figure, pausing longer on the broken ones, not out of pity but recognition. And at the center, she stood before the woman she'd sculpted. "Thank you," she whispered, not to the clay, but to the version of herself who never stopped walking, even when the world called her mad, fragile, invisible. Especially then. Outside, snowflakes began to fall in slow spirals. Inside, a new peace took root, not loud, not triumphant, but deep, like the silence between heartbeats, like truth. Because healing had never meant forgetting. It meant remembering with tenderness. It meant choosing to live when the world told you only to endure. It meant becoming the story no one could erase. And now to those of you who've walked this journey beside her, let this not be the end. Let it be an invocation. If this story touched something buried deep within you, like, comment, share your thoughts. Follow this channel not for the noise of drama, but for the echo of stories that heal, rebuild, and make us whole. Because somewhere someone is still sculpting their escape, and they need to know they are not alone. Let the world remember. Let you be the voice that helps them begin.